Hi everybody, welcome to this week's episode of our 45-gallon progression series. We're going to sort of take a tangent this week and we're going to talk about corals. So if those of you who don't know anything about corals, there are three major types of corals. There's soft corals, LPS, and then SPS corals. And in this tank we happen to have all three of them. So the first coral that we're going to talk about is soft corals. Many people know soft corals as like the polyps or zoanthids. Leather corals, pomzinias, or anything that doesn't actually build skeleton. So by definition, like soft corals, it just means that they do take elements out of the water, the alkalinity and the calcium, but they don't actually construct a solid structure like other corals do. Soft corals are the easiest corals to take care of. They don't require a ton of light, they don't require perfect water parameters, and they're just overall hardy. They're great beginner corals. And honestly, I think that they're some of the better looking corals out there anyway, so that's why we ended up going with them in this tank. The second category of corals is called LPS corals, or large polyp stony corals. These corals actually construct a skeleton, and what I mean by that is it's simply a limestone skeleton that the flesh sits on top of, and they pull the elements out of the water and they deposit that onto a skeleton and it provides them with protection. Most corals are called reef builders, like hard corals are, because they actually build the solid structure of the reef. And the last category of corals is SPS corals, and they pretty much have very minimal flesh, mostly skeleton. We'll do some close-ups and I'll show you actually what an LPS is, and we'll compare that directly to an SPS. And SPS are some of the fastest growing corals, but they're some of the hardest corals to take care of. They're very finicky, they need super stable water parameters, they need some higher quality light. They live in brighter parts of the ocean, they live in more nutrient-rich parts of the ocean, and it's just hard to replicate their environment without having a lot of algae or high nitrates or sick fish, and the list just sort of goes on and on. Another thing I wanted to touch on quick is compatibility of fish with corals. Now, I actually have some things in this tank that are not classified as reef compatible, and believe it or not, that's actually the sea anemones. Most people don't look at the sea anemones and say, oh yeah, they're not reef safe, but they're really not. Not reef safe applies to anything that can harm a coral. There are some corals that are not reef safe. There are some crabs that are not reef safe. Mostly people think that certain fish are not reef safe. Another really funny thing I like to point out is that our clownfish host our clam, but they don't host the sea anemones. I don't know what's wrong with them. So there's other types of corals. Those are three major categories: soft corals, LPS, and SPS corals. There's gorgonians, there's non-photosynthetic corals. List of what corals actually are, there's so many different types of them. So let's actually go into what a coral is. Corals are descendants of jellyfish, believe it or not. You take a jellyfish, turn it upside down, and you stick it to a rock, literally what a coral is. And over time, I guess, they've evolved in different shapes, sizes obviously, and some produce a skeleton underneath. That's why most of them are just the soft corals. They're the closest descendant of jellyfish. So if that sort of gives more sense of what a coral is, it is an animal, but it has a plant living. It's not like it's a plant. There's photosynthetic algae that lives in the animal of the coral, and that's what produces energy for them. In exchange for that algae, gets protection from the coral's flesh. So the reason I think that this tank's been doing so well is because we've actually been recording and testing all of our parameters. And we went over that a little bit in the first episode. The alkalinity is right on track, around 8 to 8.5. It doesn't fluctuate too much. Calcium's right at 370, I think. Magnesium's 1350 on the nose. Nitrates are right around 12 to 16. And a great way to make sure that your tank is up to date, is up to par on your parameters, is something that we're just starting to offer now. So another cool thing that we're going to start doing is selling water analysis tests. What you do is you take some of your tank water, you fill it up to the line on this cup, you stick it in a box that we send this to you with. It's going to have a return label and everything on it, and for $20 we're going to give you a 10-point analysis of your water. And that's much cheaper, obviously, than buying all the test kits necessary. It's close to $200 worth of test kits to test all that kind of stuff, but it's pointless to get if you're not going to test it all the time. So this is a very economical way to see where you're at and sort of give yourself a baseline with your water parameters, because we think that's the single most important thing when it comes to your reef tank. Also on our website along with our 10-point analysis, is we're going to be selling used equipment. We've tested all the equipment, it works great, it's just simply used. We've vinegared, bleached, everything's all clean, we've inspected it, no broken parts. We can't offer a warranty on them because we actually don't have warranties on them if we're selling them, but it's a great way to get, you know, higher quality equipment at a more economical cost. So yeah, check it out.